Hello and welcome back to another episode of On the Cube Leadership Podcast, where we look at things that are happening in the news from across the world in all different spheres to see how, yes, we talk about them a little bit, but to really investigate how we can learn from them as metaphors of how we can be better leaders. One of the big challenges we face as leaders is we're going to face enemies. If you haven't faced an enemy yet, you probably haven't led for long enough, because if you put yourself out there, if you put yourself in a place where you're taking ground and overcoming obstacles, and I'm sorry, there is a little bit of a weird sound in that audio, Yash. If you can try to fix that, it is actually quite distracting. So if you're, that is actually really distracting, sorry. But as a leader, we face obstacles, we face enemies. And I think that it's how we actually handle or respond to those enemies that makes a massive difference. I believe that we as leaders should take control of our enemies, not let our enemies control us, because too often we allow our enemies to dictate what we can, what we can't do. They force us to play small. They cause us to worry and have anxiety and change how we may do things. But today I think we've got 5 really good examples of what different ways in which really good leaders handle haters. And so we're going to talk about that today, not just with me, but as always with the business pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill. Dr. Rod, welcome once again.
It's good, as always, to be with you, Craig, and I'm looking forward to our time together.
Dr. Rod, have you ever had any enemies?
Sure. None I want to kill, but I've had plenty of enemies, don't worry.
Yeah, look, there's, we could talk about biblical times, how they were charged to go out and kill their enemies, but I don't think that's going to be one of our examples from today. We actually have some really, really good examples to talk about. So let's get into our first example today is Patrick Bet-David. Patrick Bet-David is, we've brought him up a bunch of times. He's from Valuetainment. He's launched a media agency called Valuetainment, has an amazing podcast called PPD Podcast, talks about business and finance and political things, and he has, a lot of really really broad spectrum of visitors that come in. He recently did an interview. Well, he's doing a lot of stuff at the moment promoting his book. His book is called Choose Your Enemies Wisely. And he recently did this interview with Grant Cardone. I sound a little bit American when I said that, Grant Cardone. And he kind of mentioned a little bit about his book. And then I went to do a little bit of research. I'm looking forward to coming out. Now, we will probably do a full episode, maybe discussing this book once both Dr. Rod and I have had a chance to read it. Well, I'll listen to it. But it's one of those. I think that we'll do a book club or something on it, Dr. Rod. I think that'll be really good. But there's another video in which we've linked below also, where he goes through his 10 enemies that should motivate you, and part of his challenge or what he actually. Sorry, I realized that I'm talking about sharing my screen, and I have not shared my screen yet. Sorry, Yash. That is my fault. Hold on a second. There we go. I saw Yash. I saw you put Yash is our production guy. I saw him cover it up by bringing something on the screen. I'm like, oh, it is showing, but it was different. So he has this video where he talks through his 10 enemies that should motivate you, and he just talks about that as a leader, we should actually use enemies as a fuel to drive our success. And he goes through 10 different types of leaders or types of enemies that you should use to motivate you. And he has a really good go and watch the video. Go and watch the video. He tells some really good stories in there, and there's some great examples of how you can use enemies as motivation. So, Dr. Rod, our first way in which we should handle enemies or control our enemies and not let them control us is use them as motivation. So, what's your thoughts on this theory?
Look, it's a new idea to me. No doubt others have had it in the past, but I think one of the exciting things about it is not saying get back at your enemies, except by being successful yourself. So he's really saying don't let your enemies keep you down, but use them to motivate you to success, motivate you to do well. And I was enthralled by the interview, and I'm going to buy the book. It'll be published in about a month, and I think it's going to throw some new light on the management of businesses, especially the establishment of new businesses. And the title, in some ways, is a little bit misleading. This is about building a successful business, and I think the way in which he talks about using enemies as motivators, but not motivators for hatred or for payback, but motivators toward your own success.
Yeah, let it fuel you, because too often we can let those haters or the enemies really crush our spirit and really get us down. I know, like, when I go through problems, sometimes my mind is my greatest tool, but it's also my greatest enemy. It can cause me to overthink things. It can cause me to spiral a little bit. Oh, this person should have done that. They should have done this, and they said this, and they did that. And as you know, you've been helping me through some of my personal challenges that I've been having lately, and that's actually been I have been using it as an excuse. Now, here's the thing: if you go through some tough things and you go through some challenges, it's not like you shouldn't. This is kind of one thing that I kind of want to emphasize is you shouldn't expect that. No one expects you, if you're going through a tough challenge, to instantly turn that into success. Well, I need to use this as fuel to get me through. One thing that I actually talk about a lot with my clients that are going through challenges is be realistic. Take a real understanding of what your situation is right now. Take account of where you're at right now, because if you're going through a tough time, maybe it's not time to start taking on new challenges and try to build and try to succeed and try to take over the world. No, recognize that, you know what? I only have the emotional energy. So for example, I have this one thing that, as I mentioned, I've been going through some personal challenges lately that Dr. Rod and my team have been helping me through. And one of the things that I've been wanting to do this year is move out of my apartment that I live here and try to find another apartment. And I was trying to do it in the middle of dealing with all these personal challenges. And then I realized, hold on a second, yeah, I do want to move out, but I don't have the emotional capacity, because we all know moving, even if you pay someone else to move and everything like that, there's still the emotional energy of and the time of looking for a new place and going and doing inspections and then applying for places, and then if you get it, then you got to find a move list, you got to pack things up, you got to there's a lot of emotional and time, emotional energy and time that's put into moving. And so I realized, hold on a second, I'm going through this other challenge that I need to focus my energy on and my emotions on. Let me deal with that first, get that done out of the way. Let me recover emotionally from that, and then I can consider taking on a new challenge and then moving forward and moving out or whatever. But I think that's kind of like just a little bit of not a caveat. Let's say an asterisk to this, because I think that there is way too much done around the personal development space, etc., that kind of says, you need to take on the world and you need to keep charging forward no matter what you're facing. Right? Yes, you need to do that, but you also need you need to take an audit, I suppose, is and really analyze, do I have the energy for this? No, I don't. Let me deal with this first, and then afterwards, then let's use that for fuel to drive me forward. So it's not about jumping straight from a challenge to success. It's get through your thing, get through your challenge, recover, recoup, like do everything you need to. I'd actually just mentioned to Dr. Rod, who's like, this weekend I'm going away to the mountains by myself. I'm just going away, taking some time out just to connect into nature, get closer with God again, like just recover, because I need to just get away. I live in a big city. It's all craziness. I just need to get out, get to nature, get back to God, recover, so that I can move on to the recharge and then get on to the next step. But Dr. Rod, actually, do you have anything to add to my little rant that I just said?
Well, the thought that was running through my head as you were sharing there was that there are numerous stressors in our lives. Many of them we can actually manage, some of them simply by postponing them. And too much stress will cause us all kinds of problems, not the least of which is that it will impair our capacity to make rational decisions. Yeah. So, we can bear a certain load of stress, both good stress and bad stress, but we can't bear even too much good stress because it'll kind of tip us over into the bad stress area. So to the extent that we're able to, we do need to manage the stressors in our life. And sometimes, as you did, you postponed a decision and an action, and I think that's very wise. So leaders do need to bear that in mind, that they can become overstressed even when all of their stressors are producing that positive eustress, the good stress. Mm-hmm. Too much stress of either kind can do us a lot of damage. So, we do need to manage it. It's an important skill for us to develop as leaders.
Yeah, and as you say that, the picture that comes to mind is that performance pressure bell curve, right? Which is all the time in our free leadership development program. Yes, shameless plug. Check out the link in the description. So there's this simple bell curve, right? That it's got the amount of pressure is along the bottom, and your performance is then on the vertical. And so it's just quite simply, and Yash is in the background trying to quickly find this so he can share it up on the screen. Good work, Yash. So it's just a performance pressure bell curve. That this works, this is important for us as leaders, but also about the pressure that we apply to our team as well. This is a bit of a side, rant that we've just found, detour that we've found ourselves on, but there's always a good lesson in it. But we need to be well aware of the pressure we put on ourselves and the pressure we put on our teams, because there is this happy medium. You can see that big happy, smiley face. There is a certain point where there is a lot of pressure, but there's also a lot of performance. But if you add more pressure, then obviously there is going to be a diminished returns in performance. And also, if there's not enough pressure, we all know that sometimes, and I suppose this is actually what PBD is talking about here, is sometimes we need something that's driving some sort of a pressure, and maybe it's an internal thing of using the fuel of someone that's hurt us, whether it be an ex or a business partner or some trolls on the internet or whatever it might be. We need to use that to add that little bit more pressure to ourselves to perform at our peak, but understand that there is a tipping point where we can actually perform worse if there's too much pressure. And we need to know that for ourselves, but also for our team. Because I think that leaders just think, I put more pressure and they'll perform better. No, that's not the right. We've seen people have burnout. We've seen people, that just just crumble under pressure. And leaders go, well, it was their problem. They just couldn't perform. No, you as a leader put too much pressure on them. You need to know your team. You need to understand your team so that they can perform. You can find the right amount of pressure, because that bell curve is just a generic line. It moves for each person. I am the sort of person that I perform better under a lot more pressure. And so my curve is a little bit more that I'm that way, what a little bit more that way, right? Than the other. I know some people that their performance is better with really low pressure, but the bell curve is still relevant, and it's our responsibility as leaders to make sure that we understand each individual person that we're leading to where their level of performance is, and we understand us as well. Dr. Rod, sorry, too many rants today.
That's all right. It's your podcast. You can rant as often as you like.
It's our podcast, Dr. Rod. It's ours. Yours also. Look, I don't know whether you can tell, but this week I am sick. I've got a bit of a head cold, and I told Dr. Rod that he's going to have to carry it a little bit, and I'm doing more talking today than I normally do. But let's move on and talk about, okay, so how do we actually use those people for motivation? Because one key thing you mentioned before is not doing anything vengeful. Like we're not doing this, we're not turning around to get back at those people, but we're using this for an internal thing to drive and motivate us. How do we use that in a healthy way?
Well, maybe I could give you a little example. I remember many years ago now, when I was still a school child, I would have been about 15 at the time, so I suppose I was a teenager. But I remember that one of our teachers asked the whole class to sort of form a semicircle, and he went around the class and wanted to know what we wanted to do when we sort of left school. And it got to my turn. We went through all the builders, the butchers, the candlestick makers and all that sort of thing, and got to me and I said, I want to become an academic, sir. And I don't know how many of our watchers will know the word guffaw, but it's a sort of deep, guttural laugh, a laugh of great derision. Okay. Well, he guffawed at my ambition to become an academic. And I ended up becoming a professor in a university. So I didn't let that hold me back.
An academic.
I'm now an emeritus professor.
Of an academics.
So, I didn't let that hold me back. Now, it could have, because I've come across many people who have had someone say something like that to them or laugh at their ambition. And that has actually caused them to miss out altogether. Yeah. And it breaks my heart when that happens. So, in a sense, he was my enemy, because he was coming between me and the realisation of my ambition and what God's destiny was for me. Yep. But I didn't let that happen, and I don't know whether it spurred me on to work hard as a school kid. I can remember spending many Sundays sitting outside in the sun so I could get a suntan like everybody else in the class, with a card table and studying. I used to study many hours every day. Throughout university, I never worked less than about 65 hours a week, often at least 100 hours a week. So it really spurred me on to working hard. I used to call Friday night my day off. And I used to go to the pub on a Friday night. That was my day off. Sunday was an easy day. I used to just edit my essays and so on a Sunday, so it wasn't too bad. And then I used to go to bed at about 6 o'clock on a Sunday night and listen to country music. So there you go. That'll cause a few of our fans to disappear. But in the end, see, I've often thought back on that day how, and look, I've never even felt any animosity towards that man. I didn't even think of going there. But I just thought, you know what? I'm going to work and I will achieve. And the only downside of that is that I have no sympathy whatsoever for people who tell me how hard they're working until they can demonstrate they're working 60 or 70 hours a week.
Yeah, I'm the same. I talk to people and they turn around to me like, oh, I'm so tired. I'm just working so much. I'm not getting. I'm like, okay, all right. Tell me about your day, and they've just got the easy day.
I know, absolutely.
Yeah. I currently work in 3 different time zones. I have a 3-year-old boy. Don't talk to me about that. But I think that there's with us using this as motivation. I think for me, I want to kind of emphasize that there's 2 different types of motivation. If we're going to talk about motivation, there's 2 different types of motivation, and this was a theory that I studied at university when I studied sports psychology, and it's called self-determination theory. And there's two different types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the one that's inside, that drives you, the vision, the purpose, the goals, all those sorts of things. The extrinsic are the rewards, like the trophies, the money, the fame, the whatever it may be. And while most people focus on the extrinsic motivation, what all the studies showed is it was only the intrinsic motivation that would actually drive people through major obstacles. So being able to actually push yourself through those rainy days, push yourself through an injury, push yourself through haters and stuff, that's intrinsic motivation. And I think that that's what PBD is talking about here is give yourself some fuel. Like, yes, you can go for the money and the fame and the accolades and all that sort of stuff, but you need to have something internal as well. And that's what I think this does, is it drives something internally of like, I want to prove this as an internal thing. And you need to focus on it being an internal thing, not I'm just going to prove them wrong, because that's still an extrinsic thing. It must be intrinsic of like, I'm going to do this because I believe in myself. And one other thing that I kind of want to jump on with that you mentioned, Dr. Rod, is, it was your purpose. If you had have listened to that person who scoffed at you, or what was that type of laugh that you said?
It's called guffaw. You should
guffaw.
Google it. It's a beautiful word. It's a beautiful word.
Guffaw.
I've only ever used it in connection with that one incident, by the way. No one has ever guffawed at me since.
Well, let's hope that we can create some guffaw moments between us. So you mentioned that if you had actually listened to him, you would have actually been discouraged and maybe not lived out your purpose. And I think that that's the key. With all these things we're talking about, like, yeah, use those things. And so many people will turn around and like, I'm going to prove that to my ex or to my family or whatever. And they go out and try to chase something. They try to chase success, but they're not trying to chase their purpose. So yes, you can use these people to motivate you, to drive you to achieve your purpose, yes, but don't use it just to drive towards success or just try to prove them wrong, because you're never going to get there, or you might get there, but it will be unfulfilled. But if you genuinely know what your purpose is, your God-given calling and what He has anointed you to do, then yes, use it as internal motivation to drive you towards your purpose, but don't just try to chase an empty thing just to prove people wrong. Anything more for you to add with that, Dr. Rod?
Well, let me tell you something. I did learn something from Patrick Bet-David,
Yes.
and I loved it. I really loved it because he was asked this question about what is the biggest thing that stops you? And he took a little while to answer it, but he said something, I won't repeat it because he used the vernacular, which we probably wouldn't use on our show, but he said, don't listen to the BS.
Yep.
And what he was actually saying was, you know what? Don't listen to the flatterers. Mm-hmm. Don't listen to the flatterers.
Yep.
And I think he put his finger on something which is really, really important for our development as leaders. Don't look for the accolades, because a lot of those accolades, they'll be false. A lot of the flattery, it's going to be false. It's coming from people who don't really care about you. They don't really care about your destiny. They're not even necessarily on board with your purpose. They're not necessarily committed to seeing you get to your purpose. And he tells the story of him as a 21-year-old. He was very successful working in a business. I don't know what he did, but I'm guessing he must have been in sales, because that's basically the only way a 21-year-old could have made a lot of money back then, before the digital age. But he lost it all. And he no longer had his big flashy car, and he's driving around, he said, in a little Ford, And all of a sudden he had no friends. There was nobody flattering him anymore. And so he said, don't listen to them. And I think that's really, really good advice. Don't listen to the flatterers. You know, you need to pay much more attention to what's going on inside, actually, because so often it's actually the voice of God speaking to you. But anyway, long story short, I'm really looking forward to reading his book. And as you say, I think it'd be great if once we both have an opportunity to go through that book, that we chat about it on the podcast. I think he's going to shift our thinking about how to succeed in business. And so I'm really looking forward to that book very much.
I agree. Actually, there's one last thing that he mentioned in this interview that I thought was actually, it has nothing to do with our topic, but I just thought it was a really good statement that I think that we should take away as leaders is, my goal is to be net positive on society. And Grant Cardone was like, yeah, you are obviously successful. You're not going to be a burden on society. It really spoke to me because it's like, well, we as leaders definitely should make sure that we are the ones that are investing into people. We're the ones that are investing into our communities, investing into society. And we should be, depositing rather than looking to withdraw. Now, like, we can withdraw at times, like, obviously, like, there has to be, that's why they call it currency. It has to flow and everything like that. Like, we need to take, with you, Dr. Rod, I know that I try to invest in you as much as I can, but I know that I withdraw as well. We need to. We can't just constantly give, otherwise we become empty. But I think too often we look at what the world owes us and what we can get out of a situation. If like COVID happens, and what can the government give me, and or like going through drama with people are like, oh, what can I get out of this deal, and what can I benefit from this? While yes, we should still be always looking at obviously how we benefit from things. We have to. To be leaders, we have to look at how our organizations can grow and everything. But I just really thought it was really. Could you imagine if all leaders were just looking at a situation saying, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm being net positive on society, that I'm investing, that what I do contributes rather than takes away.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah, absolutely love it. I think the best epitaph we could ever wish for really would be for someone to write, the world is a better place because so-and-so actually lived in it.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go.
That's great. Okay. Now, talking about being net positive, let's turn our attention to the next topic and talk about Ethan Klein. So this was a section that, like a clip that Brett Cooper did from the Daily Wire. She has a podcast called, or a YouTube channel called The Comment Section with Brett Cooper, where she just kind of comments on things that are happening in pop culture and goes through all the interesting comments that actually flow from that. Go and check her channel out. It's really good. Keeps me updated on a bunch of things that are happening in kind of pop culture and she's a little political, so but she has been speaking about a gentleman called Ethan Klein. Now, he is from Hate 3 Productions, right? Now, once again, we're talking about how do we as leaders, how do we control your enemies? How do we make sure we have a control on situations rather than allowing the situation to control us? And I think Ethan Klein is a perfect example of how not to do it, because he's just gone through this challenge. He started up this podcast or YouTube channel where he was, I wouldn't call him a prankster, but he was definitely more just a skit, kind of just jovial, play around, just make fun, like kind of more of a comedy-based channel, I suppose. He's not a comedian. Well, he might be a comedian, but I wouldn't classify him as a comedian. But he has recently done a shift to becoming very political, and his audience is attacking him. So much so that now he's gotten to a point where he's taking a break from social media and stuff, and he's taking time away, and he's saying it's really negatively affecting him and all that sort of stuff. So he's one that has some enemies. His enemies, what is pretty much his own audience, and he hasn't handled it. He's allowed his audience to control him and his situation, his enemies to control him rather than him controlling his enemies. And the one thing that I kind of took away from this, and I know, Dr. Rod, you and I spoke about this a little bit in previous weeks, I don't know whether it was last week or the week before, but we spoke about changing our minds. Like, how do we as leaders change our mind? And it seems like he's done a big shift from being this skit style, jovial kind of content to being really political and actually gone on a warpath to try to cancel people and everything like that. And now he's kind of been somewhat cancelled, right? He cancelled himself. So I think the one lesson that I take away from this is, if you want to control your enemies, don't create them, I suppose. It's kind of like, if you're building something, if you're building an audience, if you have your followers that know you and can relate to you and are following a certain thing that you do, if you change that, then obviously those people are going to be haters, especially considering you're going to do something that's anti what they have all kind of built their following up on. And while not everyone wants to become a YouTuber, it's still relevant to leaders. Is we can be leading people in a particular way and then just change everything about it. No, our organization is now going to have a completely different focus, or I've got a completely different attitude to things, and you're going to create enemies. And those enemies are going to be the people that made you. They're your followers, and therefore they're the people that are going to cause you. They're going to control your destiny now. So, Dr. Rod, what's your thought about him doing this shift from skit style prank kind of stuff to now becoming really political and trying to cancel people and everything like that, and the change that he's had?
Well, it might indicate that there's a bit of confusion over his purpose. So he wasn't sure why he started his YouTube channel in the first place. And then it morphed into something perhaps he hadn't even planned, and clearly he now regrets it. Look, I feel sorry for the guy. I feel sorry for anybody who withdraws from what they clearly love doing because there's been a negative reaction. He's a young guy. I think he'll come out of this a little bit older and a little bit wiser, and I trust and hope that he's able to share his great talent with us again in the future. I think wisdom might have said to him, listen to Jordan Peterson, and wisdom might also have said to him, listen, mate. Wisdom in America wouldn't say listen, mate, but anyway. Look, I think wisdom might have said it's very hard to make enemies out of conservatives, but It's very easy to make enemies out of those who lean towards the left politically. And the problem that he's had is that he turned out not to be lockstep with the hard left. Mm-hmm. He made statements about the Hamas-Israel conflict that didn't line up with the overall narrative of those who are on the left politically, and so they attacked him. So what does that demonstrate? They don't love anybody.
No,
they don't love anybody. They're only in love with ideas.
Yeah, and there's this saying that I hear a lot of the commentators say is, "You're never left enough for the left."
Oh, of course not. No.
There's nothing. You just can't be left enough. Like that's it. And I think you touched on that point, and we're going back, and yes, we're banging the drum a little bit tonight because it's important. Purpose. You mentioned maybe he didn't understand his purpose, or maybe he just had the wrong purpose, which kind of, at the start, maybe it was just about views, right? That's his purpose. Build subscribers, build views. And when you're chasing those types of purpose or goals, those are those extrinsic things, right? They're never enough. They're not fulfilling enough. But when you know you're running a purpose, like we've kind of mentioned this on our podcast before, there's certain topics that we know get, our videos get views and really good views and everything like that. But that's not the purpose of us starting this is not about building a YouTube channel. While we hope it does, and if you like our stuff, give us a subscribe and give us a like, and the bell notification and all that kind of YouTube algorithm stuff. Great. If it organically grows, great. But we know we're doing our purpose. And our purpose is not about building views, building subscribers. Because if your purpose is something that's extrinsic or I don't want to say shallow, because I know it's important for YouTube, that you have the subscribers and you have the views. But if you're just chasing that, then you'll make decisions that maybe aren't the best decisions just to get the views. I mean, you speak to all these YouTubers, people like Logan Paul and Jake Paul and stuff like that, that they've gone through their fall from grace and stuff like that because they were just trying to make things more and more hysterical to try to get more and more views. And eventually it all falls apart. How do we, other than obviously knowing what our true purpose is, which is important, and if you're looking for your purpose, link in description, our free leadership development program gives you the first 10 weeks focuses on helping you discover your purpose. Yes, yet another shameless plug for our free leadership development program. Doing a lot of those today, don't know why, but we're talking about purpose, and purpose is the core of what I do and our organization and the way we do our leadership. So it makes sense. But Dr. Rod, if we are doing something and we don't feel because obviously he was doing something, let's say it's for the views, and he feels like he wants to make a shift, how do we make that shift without alienating people? Or is it just inevitable that we're going to?
Well, look, if you're talking about the hard left politically, and most people on the left are now hard left because the whole political spectrum has shifted so far and so quickly towards the left, you're going to make enemies. You just need to accept that. And it will take a long time, I think, to rebuild. Look, I hope Ethan doesn't stay away for too long. I think it would be very sad if he did. But in his time out, he really does need to sort out what is his purpose in having a YouTube channel. What is it he's setting out to achieve? And once he's sorted that out, what is the best way in which to do that? I mean, I think it would be great for him to have a small set of mentors, 3 or 4 people who can mentor him as you do, and just bounce things off them. But look, it's hard. And I suppose for most of us, particularly people my age, we've transitioned from perhaps one, if you like, perspective to another, both slowly and privately. Certainly when I was young, there was no such thing as YouTube or Facebook or any of those digital communication channels because we didn't even have desktop computers. And so our transition was by and large a private transition. For someone like Ethan, his transition was very public, of course, because he did it virtually overnight on a YouTube channel. And then, of course, as soon as he stepped out of line, at least in the eyes of the left, they come down on him like the proverbial ton of bricks. So he does really need to sort out. So why do I want a YouTube channel? If it's just to maximise the number of likes and the number of subscribers, then just be an actor. You know?
Yeah.
In Jesus' days, the Greek word was hypocrite. That's what actor means, a hypocrite. Be one. Be the best the best actor or the best hypocrite that you can be. But just bear in mind, of course, that if you upset the people on the left, they will come after you. You can upset us conservatives as much as you like, but we will almost always maintain our position of courteous debate because that's part of the conservative agenda.
It's good. And we tend to be a little bit more forgiving.
Well, I mean, to the extent that we've been influenced by a Christian worldview,
Yeah.
we do forgive, and we do a fair bit of turning of the cheek as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Aren't they lucky?
Aren't they lucky? So to handle haters, like, a lesson we can learn from Ethan Klein. I forgot his last name there for a moment. A lesson we can learn from Ethan Klein from H3 Productions. How do we handle our haters? How do we control our haters? Don't let them control us by overnight changing who we are. Look, if you feel like you want to make a shift, do the journey. We spoke about this pretty sure it was last week. Make the journey progressive. Let people know that you're doing the journey. Explain the journey. Maybe start, if we're talking YouTube or whatever, but this is in business as well. Maybe start something else as well on the side that plays towards that new desire or that new track that you want to take, rather than trying to convert everyone within your existing platform to become this new this new audience or whatever. They may not be ready or may not be willing. Give people an opportunity, an option to come along that journey with you, and help explain that process as well. So how do we control enemies? Well, don't let them control us by changing who we are overnight, and then shocking them and forcing them to be enemies. I suppose that's the real lesson there. Next story that we're going to be talking about is, well, I don't know whether this was so much an enemy. They became an enemy. Well, they were kind of in at that time, but maybe it was an enemy of society, or of humankind, as Elon Musk mentions it. But Elon just recently, about a week or so ago, did this interview with Joe Rogan. Very long interview, but actually I think that Stephen Crowder did a good kind of review of it, and then also added in some context with a lot of things. But one thing that that Elon Musk was talking about is, like, Twitter almost became this enemy of humanity, because they were so controlled by the government and forcing fake news and trying to push a particular agenda, that it actually negatively affected. He says, look, you can actually tell around. He said it's like, he didn't use the word zombie apocalypse, but I interpreted it as something like that. That if you look around the headquarters and everything like that, everything around there is just, you can see it's had such a negative effect, this negative perspective or whatever that they had of that. And so what did Elon Musk do to his enemies? He bought them. He bought them out. Now, I know this is an old story, but it was actually a rehash from this recent interview that I thought that was actually quite interesting. That the perspective that he had is, like, for me to overcome my enemies, I just buy them out. Now, I know that's not possible for most people, but I thought this was kind of a little bit motivating and a good motivation, because I know, Dr. Rod, you're heavily involved with businesses' mission, and we talk about that businesses are our ministries and everything like that, and I think that this is kind of pushes that narrative of, this is the reason why good leaders, good Christian leaders, need to build successful organizations, so that we do have the funding that we can. If we have any enemies, just buy them out. Like if you've got enemies, like, could you imagine if you're running a business and there is an enemy down the road that is spreading bad rumors about you, that is they're your competition and everything like that, and they're spreading bad rumors, they're stealing your clients. Could you imagine how easy it would be to just buy them out? And this is kind of like a real encouragement of, like, you need to build a successful business so that you can go and buy out your enemies. Dr.
Oh,
Rob.
absolutely. Build a business so big you can buy Anheuser-Busch and Target all on the same day. Look, it's not an option for most of us, but look, if you're an Elon Musk and you feel very strongly about free speech, as he certainly does, and you're in a position, then go and do it. Now, of course, there was a period during which he was very reluctant to actually go through with that purchase, and I'm pretty certain that when he actually did purchase the platform, it was only worth about half as much as he paid. So he's certainly got a big challenge ahead of him. But I think, well, it's now called X, of course. It has changed because they're not deplatforming conservatives anymore. I think there's a lot of cultural change that we still need to see, because I know that conservatives still receive a lot of very hateful responses. In fact, I very rarely read responses to anything that conservatives put up on X, because 97% of them are negative, and in fact, many of them are actually quite hateful. But good on Elon Musk for not censoring those. I think, free speech cuts both ways, and we've got to be strong enough to understand that if we go public with our ideas, there might be a hateful response. That's something we have to live with, I think, if we believe in free speech. It's the old sticks and stones might break my bones, but names will never hurt me. My mother drummed that into me when I was a small child, because she was basically saying, when people call you names, and of course small children always do, don't retaliate. Don't let it get under your skin. And so I think we've got to grow up, I think, and actually champion the idea of free speech. And sure, if you see a business behaving badly and you're in a position to actually change it by buying it, pray about it first, and if you get the green light, then go ahead by all means, because ownership of a business means you've got the upper hand when it comes to changing the culture. And you don't necessarily need to own 100% of a business, by the way. I did meet a businessman who was a business as mission practitioner in a country that basically locks up Christians. He said to me, you need to hold about 20% of a business in order to be able to influence the culture of the business. And he was someone who was in business, and I think he had about 21% of the shares of that particular company. So you don't necessarily need to actually own a business outright to have an influence, but you need to have a big enough holding to be able to wield some influence. But it's a good way to go, and there are certainly in America, there are lots of private Christian-owned companies that are large and successful, and it might be something for them to consider. But for people like you and me, right now, not a possibility, but there's nothing wrong with aspiring to be able to shift culture through buying businesses. It's a great strategy, and one of many, of course, but it's a great strategy.
There's one thing that you mentioned about, like, you don't like reading the responses and stuff like that, and we need to just be aware that they're going to happen. So one thing that there was a quote that Elon said during this interview said that Twitter or X should be the collective consciousness of humanity, and I think that's important for us. Going on what you're saying, is important for us to know is, like, everyone has the right to have an opinion. Everyone has a right to share their thoughts. I think we can get too caught up in, this is the challenge. You talk about free speech, but you only want your speech. You just want your opinions to be free, and then no one else should be able to say something. Well, I think that we as leaders need to, like you said, grow up. A very Australian colloquialism is like, have a teaspoon of cement, right? Like, just harden up, right? Because you as leaders, we're going to get attacked and we're going to have enemies. And so we need to be hardened to that a little bit and just be aware that that is life, and we shouldn't use it. We shouldn't shy away from it. But like Patrick Bet-Davies was saying, we should use that as fuel. We should use that to drive us. I want to just for a moment, we've mentioned this a few times. I just want to give you a bit of a platform for a second, Dr. Rod. You are involved in this organization called Business's Mission. Tell us a little bit more about that, and like how can, like, if someone's interested, like, how do they get involved? Like, what is it? What does it do? Like what, I know that you're involved. Let's share.
Well, look, it's really a movement. It's a movement that was established originally, I guess, by evangelicals. And what it's really about is establishing businesses in countries that are the least evangelized and the poorest countries in the world. And it's using those businesses in order to live out the gospel of Jesus. And of course, in that process, you will convince others that they should give their lives to the Lord as well. So it is evangelical in that sense, but it's about building businesses that are profitable in their own right and that are conscious of a spiritual bottom line. So yes, they need to make a profit in order to be sustainable. They need to care about the people in their business, the people in the community round about them, the people who regulate them, and importantly and unusually, they need to care about their competitors as well. They need also to be considerate of the planet, so they need to recognise that their business activities might have impacts on the natural environment and take that into account and do what they can to mitigate their impact on the natural environment. And then also in terms of the spiritual bottom line, what's happening in terms of people coming into that saving relationship with Jesus Christ and flourishing as human beings. I think one of the great things about Business's Mission is, you see, when someone gets involved as an employee, for example, they begin to understand that it's okay to have aspirations for a better future. And there are many, many worldviews which really they kind of suppress and oppress people because they lead to the idea that wherever I am today, I cannot hope to become any better. And I think that's one of the dreadful things about this scourge of cultural Marxism, the idea that there's this oppressed class, because if you're in the oppressed class, you've got no hope of getting out unless, of course, you pick up your arms and revolt against the ones who you've been led to believe are oppressors. But this idea that someone belongs to an oppressed class and cannot succeed, it's an absolute lie that comes from the pit of hell. I believe that Business's Mission is spreading something quite different, which is the idea that, you know what, I can actually aspire to no longer be a prisoner of poverty. I can have a meaningful, paid position in a business where I'm genuinely treated as if I have the same value as every other human being on the planet. And our value, of course, arises because God is the one who created us and God loves us. Yes. And look, Business's Mission, the ideas of Business of Mission, they've crept well outside the boundaries of the least evangelized and poorest countries of the world. I know many people who practice the principles of Business as Mission, and they are absolutely wonderful people. Look, when America withdrew from Afghanistan, there were literally hundreds of Business as Mission operations where the owners said, we want to stay despite the dangers and despite the deprivations. They said, no, God has called us to stay here because we're here for the benefit of the people. Same thing in places like Russia and Ukraine. And, one of the greatest challenges for Business's Mission practitioners in those countries is, how do I respond when my brother is now, at least on an official level, my enemy?
Yeah.
Well, we respond with love. So, yes, I've been fairly heavily involved with Business's Mission. It's one of the great passions of my life, as is Kingdom Initiatives and the All Shall Prosper movement, which I think I actually would go so far as to say these actually offer a way out of the decline in Western civilization. And I know that sounds like a very, very bold claim, but, I watched a lot of the videos that came from the Ark conference last week, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to touch on that a little later in our podcast when we talk about Mike Johnson, the newly elected Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States. But I actually think, and see, look, as soon as you offer, if you like, Christian solutions, people write you off as someone who's, you're a far right activist, and it's all a load of what we call in Australia codswallop, et cetera, et cetera. It's
Bible
not
bashing.
The claims are not true, et cetera, et cetera. But the principle that every single human being has value, that's the most radical idea ever introduced into human thought. It came from the early Christians. The idea that ambition, aspiration is a good thing, the desire to flourish, the desire to be in a better position next year than you are today, that's a uniquely Christian idea. And look, that's the idea that's rid the world of much of its poverty. And it's taken a long time to get here, of course, but these ideas are really important. And often they're unexpressed, but you can observe the ideas or the thinking of people by the way in which they behave. And one of the reasons why, I put so much effort into this podcast, because it takes me a full day of preparation and actually recording the podcast, is I agree with you. There need to be a few people whose ambition it is to rid the world of poor leadership, because the world will be a better place with better leadership. Leaders who are not looking for their own self-interest, but who are looking for the betterment of those around them or those that they touch by their business activities or whatever activity they happen to be involved in. So yes, I'm a passionate believer in the principles of business as mission and kingdom initiatives as well. And in fact, the reason why I gave up full-time paid employment in 2020 was, one, so I could become a better pastor, and two, so I could spend more time pursuing business as mission and kingdom initiatives. Those are the three things that really drive my purpose on earth at the moment.
That's great. And these things that Dr. Ross is talking about, we'll chuck links. They're not down there at the moment, but Yash, if you can remind us, we'll put the links to those if you want to find more about those organisations, kingdom initiatives, and business as mission. There's one other you mentioned. No, that's kingdom initiatives.
ASP, all shall prosper, is really kingdom initiatives. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the very simple idea there is every time you engage in a business transaction, you figure out a way to enable everybody involved or affected by that transaction to prosper, to be better off than they were before the transaction took place. Some people characterise it very simply as you make sure you leave something on the table for everybody.
Yeah, that's good. So we'll put links to those below and everything, but back to our topic of how do leaders control their enemies? Build successful businesses so that you can just buy them out. That's the best way to control them, as demonstrated by Elon Musk. But you, Dr. Rod, you did mention talking about Mike Johnson, and let's move on. Let's move on to that topic. So this week I saw an article about Mike Johnson, who is actually the Speaker of the House of Representatives in the United States. Now, this article is by The Hill, and it was about the Johnson pushes back against criticism of his Christianity. These people don't know me. And we're talking about how do you control enemies. And I think that this just really spoke to me about his attitude towards haters or his enemies and how he responded to it. Now it talks about that they're attacking him because you're meant to be they're saying he's a far right and he's going about trying to chase for white Christian nationalism and there's a lot of haters for him because he is a conservative and a proud Christian, and Dr. Rod's going to talk about his recent presentation as well. But it was something that he said. Let me find. Where that topic, where it was. He said, look, there are entire industries built on tearing down people like me. I understand that that comes with the territory, and we're not phased by it. He's actually talking about his family, how his family are also affected and everything like that. I think there's kind of two things in there that were actually really key. Is first of all, there's an understanding of like, look, I know it just comes with the territory. If I'm going to be a leader, if I'm going to try to push boundaries, if I'm going to try to take ground and grow an organization, whatever it is in leadership, we need to understand there is going to be opposition. We say in Australia, the tall poppy syndrome, right? You stand up amongst the crowd and someone's going to want to cut you down, right? It just comes with the territory, as he says. So as a leader, we just need to know. We need to emotionally and physically prepare ourselves of like, just comes with the territory. And then the second thing that he said was, and we're not phased by it. There's one thing of like just taking it on and going, yes, I know that that's part of the territory, but still getting worried, still getting affected, still having anxiety, still allowing, as people say, is like allowing them to live rent free in your head, right? Like, don't let it phase you. Now, I know that can be hard because I mentioned at the start of this, I overanalyze things. I sometimes go a little crazy. I'm not saying you should never be phased by it. I think the reality of this is don't let that affect you for a long term. In the moment, I go through this. I'll mull over it for the day. I can't believe that person said this. I can't believe this. Like maybe an hour or maybe a day or whatever. But I go through my process, right? I'll go through it. I'll mull over it and kick the dirt, so to speak, and everything like that. But look, if it's a major thing, I'll reach out to someone like Dr. Rod or maybe one of my other mentors that or my psychologist or whatever, and talk it out. If it's an extreme thing, I do. I just let's work through this because I don't want this to affect me long term. But we can't be phased by it. So we need to get our support network around us. We need to build up our tools. I think I mentioned this last week, but Dr. Rod, I said to him and my psychologist, I'm like, yeah, I'm going through these personal challenges, but I haven't actually been speaking to them as much lately because they've helped me so much that now I kind of know their answers to things that there's been some of these things like, they're this little voice in my head, on my shoulder, the angel voice telling me the right thing to do in these moments. So we need that support. We need to build the tools so we can handle these situations. Dr. Rod, how do you not get phased by things?
Well, have confidence in the worldview that you hold. So in order to do that, you need to know what your worldview is. So mine happens to be a Christ-centered, Bible-based worldview. And the more research I do, the more confident I am that that is the best description, if you like, of reality. So the best way in which to process the reality of the world around me is through the lens of a Christ-centered, Bible-based worldview. Now, that is why I'm not phased. It gives me confidence, but not arrogance. And this is what I see in Mike Johnson. I see a man who is confident in his Christianity. He's confident in his worldview, but he's not arrogant about it. And in fact, I love that phrase he used, they don't know me, because it's actually true.
Yes.
I mean,
that's
who
right.
in the world had heard of Mike Johnson a month ago?
Yeah. Actually, I know you're about to get on to talk about his speech, but I just want to kind of jump in there because what you're saying is actually the next part of this article. He goes on to say, but listen, what I believe in is, and he states out the things that he believes in, right? Let me highlight this for the viewers at home, right? He says, I believe in the founding principles of this country. And he goes on the individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law. Like, he just kind of emphasized, like, this is what I believe in. It was exactly what you're saying, Dr. Rod, is like, we need to know what we believe in and be able to stand firm to our principles and who we are and what we're called to and things like that. That's how we not let things phase us.
Oh, absolutely. That's knowing about your own worldview, what the view that you hold and why you hold it, and it should give us confidence, but it's no excuse for arrogance. And I don't
No.
see any arrogance at all in anything that Mike Johnson has said publicly, even the way in which he responded to what really was a fatuous op-ed article that he was asked to respond. It was fatuous. It made these outrageous claims about Christian nationalism, and I mean, it was quite a joke, really, when I read it. But you see, it's typical of those who are on the left, because it was just full of name calling.
Yeah.
There was nothing factual in it. I mean, I wouldn't argue about truth here. We're talking about facts. Mm-hmm. I love actually what he said. You quoted that, I believe, in human flourishing, etc. A little bit further down in the interview, he says this, and I actually think this is really, really important. He says, "I believe in the sanctity of every single human life.
Yeah.
So I come to Congress with the personally held convictions, but guess what? So do my 434 other colleagues in the House. Everyone who comes to Congress with their deeply held convictions." And we all do. And I know a lot of people say, well, I don't take my values into the House, or I don't take my values into the classroom, or whatever. I don't take my values into the boardroom. Rubbish. Mm-hmm. If you believe that, you're a fool. Yep. You always take them with you, because they're the lens that you have on all the time, through which you process the world around you. And I think he's being perfectly honest. And I agree with him. The very basic principle in Christianity and in some other religions as well is that every single human being has value. He says, my fundamental belief is in the sanctity of human life. And that's going to influence everything he thinks and says and does. But I love it how he responds, because he doesn't get angry, upset, or arrogant. He just says, look, this is my fundamental belief. This is what drives me. And guess what? Everybody has such a belief. It won't necessarily be the same belief, but everybody has a belief. And I mean, for some, it might their fundamental belief might be, I just simply need to get as much power as I can and hang on to that until the day I die. Maybe that's what motivates some people in the Congress. Who knows? Looking at the way in which some people behave, that might be true. But that was such a disarming response. To say on the one hand, well, look, I'm unfazed by all of that. He's saying, look, I've got confidence in the worldview that I hold, and I'm not going to be shaken. Yeah. The fact that he says all of this criticism comes with the territory, he's absolutely right about that. That's just a statement of fact. So he's clearly faced up to that and said, well, you know what? If I'm going to take on this particular role, I'm going to be criticised. In fact, there'll be plenty of people who probably hate me. There'll be those who accuse me of trying to implement some kind of Christian nationalism philosophy. I guarantee he won't. And I can guarantee 99% of those who are accused of this Christian nationalism, that's the furthest thing from their mind. But what they are trying to do is to embody or embed within the culture and the law and the practice in America those things that have stood America good over so long a period of time. And, even the founding fathers, they never set out to establish some kind of theocracy. And I follow a lot of leading Christian thinkers in the United States, and many of them, I think, would be accused, along with Mike Johnson, of being Christian nationalists, but they're not, because they never suggest that we should remove the fundamental principle of that separation between state and church. And the separation, of course, means that the state must never be given the power to determine a state religion. Yeah. There are plenty of countries in the world where there is a state religion, never in America, And I know of no Christian thinker who argues along those lines. It's just a straw man which has been developed by those who have a different worldview. And Mike Johnson's right. There are going to be people, probably even within his own party, who hold a different worldview. And I think we'll see someone who's fairly pragmatic. He's not going to try to overturn a whole raft of legislation. And Christians who believe that he will and that even he can are just wrong. They're just wrong.
Yeah.
In the same way that one Christian business person can't shift the whole business paradigm. You get enough of them together and you reach a tipping point. But I've never come across any of these Christian thinkers yet who are advocating that we do away with the separation between the state and the church, because they know that ultimately that will lead to great evil. And we see it in those nations where there is state religion. Almost always it leads to great evil.
Yeah. So kind of going back on our point of like, how do you control the enemy or your enemies is, well, expect it and don't be fazed by it.
Exactly. You disarm them.
How don't you get fazed by it? One thing you've mentioned today is like knowing your values, right? Like that's really important. We talk about knowing your values because that's how you can make your decisions. Well, this is what I'm basing everything on. This is my values. And if you don't know your values, you're going to be following someone else's values. They're going to put their values on you. So you need to know your values. How do we handle the enemy? How do we control the enemy? Don't be fazed by it. Know your values, know what you stand by, and stay on your guiding principles. So that's all we've got to say about how do you handle the enemy or how do you control the enemy. Let's go to the Bible and see what Jesus says about how do you handle the haters? How do you handle those that are against you? And we're going to go to our leadership lessons from Luke. Yeah, there's so much value in just one book of the Bible. Could you imagine if you took this time to study every book of the Bible? There'd be a lot of wisdom in there. So we're looking at Luke 9 from verse 1. And it's called, the heading is Jesus Sends Out the 12. When Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases, and he sent them out to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. I'm going to pause there. That's quite a good leadership lesson right there. How do you delegate effectively? How do you make sure that when you're assigning tasks and getting your team to do things, how do you make sure it's done properly? Well, right here. He gathered them together and gave them power and authority. Too often leaders will delegate without actually giving the right power or authority to the people. And we're also talking about the ability, right? So the skills to be able to drive out demons and cure diseases. Are you sending your team out with the right authority? Are you sending them out feeling empowered? Are you sending them out with the right skills to do what they do? I digress. And feel free to jump in on any of these sidebars.
Absolutely great digression, because I think what you're hinting at there is the difference between delegation and direction.
Yes.
If Jesus had just said, you go out and proclaim the kingdom of God and heal the sick, that's direction. But before he did that, he empowered them. He empowered them with authority and the capacity to drive out demons. And I think that's what delegation is about. Delegation empowers people, whereas with direction, essentially you tell people what to do and then you hover around them to make sure they're doing it. But with delegation, you empower people, you let them go, and then you have them report to you. So that's a great lesson in leadership, even though it might not be highly relevant to the theme for our podcast today. But it's a really, really important lesson for leaders. Trust your people, but give them the power, the authority that they need in order to be able to actually prove to you that they can be trusted with whatever it is you've delegated to them.
Yeah, and we're only 2 verses in. There is there's a lot of wisdom in this book. Okay, verse 3. He told them, take nothing for your journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra tunic. Now, I kind of want to give you an opportunity to preach that little bit for a moment, Dr. Rob, because I think that too many Christian leaders see this and go, well, I don't have to be prepared. I can just go and God will provide for my journey. Is that right?
No, unless you got a specific word from God. And look, there was a whole movement that sort of grew up in church, in the evangelical churches in the 1980s, where pastors were sending people in their congregations out just like that. Don't take anything, you just go, and then you trust God to provide. And a lot of people were seriously hurt and damaged by that experience. But as I always say, I use the CPA method when I'm reading the Bible: context, principle, application. The context here was a context of poverty where most people only had one tunic or one cloak. That's all they had. So he was saying, you're going into these areas to preach the kingdom, to preach the gospel. You go in as one of them. You go in just like them, because most of these people would have been day labourers, or they might have had a small flock of goats and sheep or something like that. They were essentially living at subsistence level. So he was saying, don't you go in there, with beautiful clothes and, a team of camels and the fastest donkey in the West and that kind of thing. Go in just like them and take the message of the gospel to them. And, when he's saying in the very next sentence, people don't welcome you, well, you see, part of the culture in the East, of course, was hospitality, right? So if people didn't welcome you, that meant they were rejecting you. And I'm sure we'll get to that.
Yes.
Read on.
So let's go. So take nothing for the journey. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, shake the dust off your feet when you leave their town as a testimony against them. And so that's where I kind of want to leave it. It does go on a little bit more, but I want to leave it there as like, how did Jesus say, how do you handle the enemies? How do you control the haters, etc.? Well, like the theologian Taylor Swift says, shake it off. Shake it off. But I'm sure, I think that is beautiful. It's like, just shake it off. Now, I know, Dr. Rod, you're probably going to give me a deep theological meaning as to what that signified in that, the context of that time. But I kind of read it more interpretively and just go, just shake it off. That's what Jesus is telling me. You got some enemies? Just shake it off.
See you later, guys, basically. See you later, guys.
Was there some cultural significance to them?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Look, back in those days, of course, you didn't have lovely Nike shoes and socks. You wore sandals. Sometimes you just went barefoot if you were too poor to have sandals. There were really very few paved roads, and so when you walked somewhere, you got your feet dirty. And an important aspect of hospitality was offering people water with which they could wash their feet. So if you went to a town and people in that town didn't take you in and offer you hospitality, your feet would have remained dirty. And so it was a cultural thing among the Jews in particular to shake off the dust, which was to shake off the profanity of paganism, actually. And so really I think what Jesus was saying was, this is a very precious message. Remember, he sent out 12. And there's a big job to do. So he's really saying, you know what? If people reject you in one town or village, Yeah, literally shake the dust from your feet, which culturally was saying essentially like we wash our hands of you. Why? Is that because Jesus didn't love them? No. It's because there was a big job to do. And the only way in which to be effective in carrying out what purpose Jesus had set out for them was to just say, see you later, guys. If you're not going to receive the message, see you later, guys. We're going to move on and we'll find a place where they are open to the message. And you know what? That's a good lesson for those of us who are leaders of any kind of Christian organisation, that, you know what, there's a big world out there, a big world. And that big world, it's in our workplaces.
Yeah.
Look, even here in Australia, about 2/3, maybe a little bit more than that, of our adult population is in paid employment, either part-time or full-time, permanent or casual. So we've got 13.5 million people in workplaces, most days, Monday through Friday. And you know what? If you're a Christian and you don't get a reception, don't get upset, don't get angry, and don't give up. Move on, because there's such a big job for us to do.
Yeah, I think that this. One thing I remember when I was learning sales training, and there was something that someone said. I forget the exact context, but it stuck to me like this: is don't waste your time trying to change someone's mind. Go and find someone who already believes in your product or service and sell them. It's much easier just to sell them if they're open to the idea or whatever. Now, obviously, we all have different purposes, and some of us have been called to really try to change people's minds and stuff like that. But we need to, once again, it's about knowing your purpose and knowing your calling. But one thing that I think that is really important for this is that you're saying is like, you don't get bogged down in that fight. If it's not a fight that God's called you to, move on from it. Dust it off, shake it off, and just move on, because we've got a bigger mission to fulfill. There's more for us to achieve in this world. Our organizations have to grow bigger so we can buy out our enemies. We need to use this stuff. Don't get trapped don't get trapped in the fight, don't allow them to live rent free in your mind. Use, as Patrick Bet-Davies said, use them as motivation, as fuel to drive you. Don't don't change the way that you operate, because then, as Ethan Klein is saying, you might get some more haters from the people that are already supporting you, that have actually been part of driving you forward. Build your big organization bigger so you can just buy that person out if need be, and also while you're doing this, as Mike Johnson typified, the Speaker of the House, stand on your founding principles. Make sure you know what your values are, so you're driving towards those things. Make those things the guiding post for you to be able to overcome your challenges that you're facing, and through that is how we control our haters. And as theologian Tay says, shake it off. So I hope that's been helpful to you, finishing on that note. As leaders, we always have haters. We're going to have enemies. That's how we handle it. Make sure that you understand your purpose, because that'll be the thing that ultimately drives you through. And if this has been helpful to you, hey, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below, and give us a word about how you've been encouraged through this. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you can see when we go live, so you can chime in on the conversation as well. And so thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. And as always, Dr. Rod, thank you for contributing and being a part of this podcast as well.
Look, as I often say, I count it an absolute privilege to join with you this time every week. Always stimulating. And of course, the preparation I do for it always makes me think, and that's got to be a good thing.
Exactly, exactly. Well, thank you, Dr. Rod. Thank you, Yash, for pressing the buttons in the background and making us look and sound good. And thank you for watching. May you have an absolutely blessed week. Make sure you learn, live, and lead on purpose.